discrimination laws refer to actual or perceived gender identity or expression. This type of provision is highly problematic for employers. How is an employer to know what an employee's sense of themselves is without the employee expressly disclosing it? The subjective nature of gender identity makes it wholly unlike an objective, immutable characteristic like race. An employer seldom, if ever, needs to wonder what an employee's race is. That is something that the employer can simply tell by observation. It is often, probably usually impossible to tell simply by looking at a person what that person's concept of their gender identity is. Indeed, gender identity is often as unobservable as religious beliefs. And religion has never received protection under Title VII without the employee specifically requesting an accommodation of a religious belief. Even then, even when an employee does request an accommodation, employers are not generally required to provide the accommodation if it is too expensive or too inconvenient for them to be able to do so. The problems raised today do not have a simple solution that can be solved by mandating accommodation by employers. In addition to religious objections, many people have genuine privacy concerns about the use of restrooms. I'm sure you've been hearing about the debate in Montgomery County, Maryland, where Montgomery County passed legislation that does allow men to use a woman's restroom before having sexual reassignment surgery. Some employers cannot accommodate the restroom issue for a transitioning employee, regardless of whether they want to. The Etzity case from the 10th Circuit that I cited in my written testimony is an example. A Utah Transit Authority bus driver dressed as a woman but had male anatomy. While driving his route, he had to use public restrooms. The employer or the employee could not necessarily find a restroom that was available for single use because every day the employee had a different bus route. This was a substitute bus driver. The employer had the choice of keeping the employee and risking claims of violation of the privacy of other people in a public restroom or terminating the employee. If there were a federal law creating protection for gender identity, the employer would have been forced to accept the risk of liability for violations of other people's privacy in public restrooms. That is a very real risk that a number of employers would face if this committee were to prepare legislation giving specific protection to gender identity. I'm not asking this committee to make a moral judgment about transgendered persons. What I am suggesting is that federal law should not make that moral judgment for all employers. Thank you.
Mr. Levy, thank you very much for your testimony. Ms. Taraboletti, welcome to the subcommittee.
Mr. Chairman and all members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Sabrina Marcus Taraboletti. I am the parent of two beautiful children who I love and who in turn love me. I am also a transgender woman. I grew up in a very conservative, traditional, middle-class, Italian Catholic family in Pelham, New York. We were a close, loving family, much like you'd see in the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. I attended SUNY Maritime College, one of the country's premier merchant marine academies, and graduated with a degree in engineering and a Coast Guard license to be an officer in the merchant marine. Shortly after college, I moved to Florida to work on the space shuttle at Kennedy Space Center. Most who know me will share that I am passionate about the space program and honored to be part of its history. After 20 years of service, my final employer was United Space Alliance, the prime contractor of the shuttle program. So what happened to my dream job? In 2003, I was summarily fired 6 weeks after announcing that I would be changing my sex from male to female. After assigning security personnel to follow my every move, charges were drummed up, and I was suspended without pay pending a board hearing for dismissal. I was escorted off the Space Center grounds and told not to return. I was told the actions were the result of an investigation initiated by an anonymous hotline call. To my knowledge, I was the fourth person attempting transition at the Space Center while trying to keep their job. The first three before me also failed. The first woman was a union machinist who could no longer take the harassment of her fellow employees and left the center to find work elsewhere. The second woman was isolated and given no work to do. She was fired after she made enough mistakes. The last woman was a launchpad technician who was jeered and scoffed at until she finally took her own life, an all too common occurrence. We fail because there are no formal transgender policies or procedures at the Space Center. There are no policies because there are no laws at the state or federal level requiring employees to have them. My future, therefore, was left up to the interpretation of people who have no education in transgender issues or needs. Worse yet, no one really cares or wanted to learn, even though I made a diligent effort to educate them. It was easier for them to find a way just to have me removed. I cannot tell you how meaningless life feels when an event like this happens. I didn't know where to turn or what future I had. I was humiliated. I was fired. After 20 years of service, I received no severance pay, nor was I allowed to collect unemployment. I have had to tell future employers or future potential employers I was dismissed. It has made finding new employment almost impossible. What is even more troubling is that I had anticipated the possibility of my job lost and worked furiously to avoid it. I reached out to my management, my coworkers, HR, and even the associate administrator of EEO for NASA, but there was no help from any level. 4 years later, after submitting what seems like hundreds of applications, I have not been able to find a new position in the space program, which is not only the field I love, but is one of the few industries in my area where an engineer like me can find a job. There are those who believe that being transgender is a lifestyle or a choice. Personally, I have lost my wife, most of my assets, and my home in divorce. I have been abandoned by half of my family and friends. At the same time, I have had to find the $70,000 to $90,000 of funding and endure the extreme pain of electrolysis and the various other surgeries required to complete the transition from male to female. All this while trying to stay employed. Believe me, no one wakes up one morning and says, "Hey, I think I'm going to change my sex today." No one says, "You know, living with that discrimination and hatred won't be all that bad after all." Being transgender is something you're born with and something you have to deal with just the best way you can. There is more to my life than just my profession. During my time at the Space Center, I married, and after 14 years, unfortunately, divorced. I have 2 children. I am their father, something I assured them would never change. My relationship with my children is very strong, and I'm active in both their academic and personal lives. My daughter, 19, presently lives with me. She attends the University of Central Florida on a full chemistry scholarship. My son, 17, is still in high school, but recently was accepted to attend as a cadet at my alma mater. But my family is not really separate from my job. My economic security impacts them as well. My feeling of worth also impacts them. So when I face discrimination, they face it too. What happens to me because I am transgender also happens to them, not only because they love me, but because I still provide for them. How I am treated is how they are treated as well. I am a good engineer, I am a good parent, and I am a good person. I am still a practicing Catholic, and I honor my country. I do not deserve the job discrimination that I faced. People should be judged by the quality of their work, by the quality of their character. So many of us face what I have faced. More are preparing to face it in the future. It needs to stop.
Ms. Taraboletti, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here. Thank you. Mr. Minter, you are our final witness on this panel. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, thank you.
I think your microphone's not on. There you go.
Better, okay, yes. Thank you very much for convening this hearing. You know, this is the first time that members of the transgender community have had a chance to talk with Congress so directly about our lives, and we very much appreciate that, and it's an honor to be here today with Colonel Shore and the other witnesses. The focus of my testimony is on the urgent need for a federal